What's up with his face?
Who do you see in the mirror now?
If we show vulnerability, we show that we are weak. It really, really impacted me, and I'll not go into it too much of it at this stage. And I was literally crying in the mirror. I stopped smiling. I said to myself, that isn't normal. Desperately tried to make sure that my mask didn't slip. I was safe maybe outside, but I wasn't safe inside. And when I stopped and when I had a bad day, that's dangerous. Welcome back to Leaders in Disguise, and this one's a little bit different. Today we're going to be going back to where it all started. We've remastered episode 1, the original conversation that launched the podcast and helped shape the movement that it's become. In this episode, the brilliant Sarah Gatford steps in as host, and I'm in the guest seat, sharing my full story honestly and openly. Since we first recorded, so much has changed. I stepped away from talk stuff completely, signing off early this year after 15 years at the helm, and more recently I've revealed something that I've been keeping very quiet. I shared my journey on national TV, on Love My Face, a powerful new TV show that aired on Channel 4 in April. This episode though gives you the full picture, the foundations behind why I do what I do now. Because Leaders in Disguise has grown beyond just those stories, it's become a real movement. We've been seeing more and more leaders talking than ever about their mental health and well-being. I've been busy over the last year delivering keynotes, running workshops, and even speaking with my MPs and people of influential positions in Parliament to push the mission forward. So, whether this is your first time listening, hello, or you're returning for a fresh perspective, I hope it connects with you. Let's rewind, and here's Leaders in Disguise, episode 1, with Sarah Gatford hosting and me, Gary Parsons, in the hot seat. Let's get into it.
First off, why Leaders in Disguise?
Why is it called Leaders in Disguise? It's something that took quite a while to come through. It was all, there's so much that's out there that is about, it's all talking about leadership, mental health, and mental health generally, and resilience. And I toyed with so many ideas around what it is to be a leader. There's so many people that go out there and say, oh yeah, you need to be more resilient, or you need to be more mindful. And all of these words just felt a little bit, I guess a little bit technical, a little bit out there, going, oh yeah, I need to be a very mindful leader. I need to be nice and calm, and I need to do this and it. And actually, mindfulness is something people need to do, but certainly takes a long time to get there. So using a word like that was always going to put them off. But for me, as you know, and I'm sure you'll probably have I love, by the way, that you're asking me 1,000,001 questions today, and I just want to for the record, I haven't seen any of these questions whatsoever. So it's really, really exciting. So forgive me for saying this now, but as you know, when I was 18, I experienced Bell's palsy. In fact, it was 2 months before I turned 18. So literally on the cusp of becoming an adult, if you like. And it really, really impacted me. And I'll not go into it too much of it at this stage. But after 5 years of being really upset, and I was literally crying in the mirror every day for 5 years in the morning, because it was so traumatic for me, that the only way for me to be able to deal with it is to put on a disguise, put on that mask, and go out there and really sadly I stopped smiling. I said to myself, the only way that I can cope with life and the only way that I can move forward is to fool everybody, to disguise myself, and ultimately lie to everybody else that I was absolutely fine and move forward. And I realized really quickly that we do wear disguises, whether we are splitting up with our partners, our wives, our husbands, our boyfriends, however they may be, that we are experience loss, that people have just a really bad time, that we walk in through the door of businesses through the door of coming here today, and we walk in and we go, "Morning, Sarah. How are you? How are we getting on?" And that isn't normal. That if you ask 10 people in the street how they are, I don't think 10 out of 10 people would tell you that they are absolutely fine. A lot of them will wear a disguise and pretend it's okay. So yeah, in answer to your question, I realized that leaders do wear disguises, and that's not okay. We need permission as leaders, especially within the business that I have done for so long, for 15 years this year, that we need permission. We need to break that stigma of being able to just go out there and not have to wear a disguise.
Just taking you back to something you mentioned, who do you see in the mirror now?
It's taken a long time for me to deal with the mirror, and I think that's a whole podcast in itself. Actually, is the mirror and what the mirror means, and the reflection, metaphorically as well as literally. I like that. I'll write that down somewhere. But yeah, for me now, when I look in the mirror, I look at all of the positive things that I love about myself. But it's taken me 3 years of lifting that mask off. In 2021, a really good friend, sadly she's no longer with us and absolutely deserves a mention, is Farah Kalik, and she gave me she inspired me. She gave me the confidence to go out there and talk about me and what I've experienced and what I've been hiding for over 2 decades. Grand old age of 41 now. And I realized that I didn't need to wear this mask anymore. I could just be my authentic self. But yeah, 3 years it's taken me to have a lot of self-care conversations with myself, thanks to Farah as well, and yourself as a good friend of mine, to soul search really, and just look in the mirror and just see just this kind, compassionate person that doesn't need to be judged, that can be his authentic self, that can be vulnerable and not be feared of judgment.
Interesting that you mentioned vulnerability, because that leads me on to ask you about seeing vulnerability as a double-edged sword. What's your perspective on that?
I used to think vulnerability was a weakness. It absolutely that, and I think that's where the stigma is that if we show vulnerability, we show that we are weak. That's
yeah.
I don't know why, don't know where that's come from, and I'm sure I'll do that research and talk to some psychologists like yourself out there and just trying to understand where it comes from. But I feel as though society, we are conditioned to see vulnerability as a weakness. And you've heard of that analogy of, you need to just let your wall down. Sarah, you build a wall and you just need to just let people talk to you and stop building this wall all the time. And that's because we get scared, we get fearful of the being vulnerable, because if somebody comes in and attacks us with we need this armor, don't we? We need to build this big armor, or certainly we feel like we do, because if we don't build the armor, then somebody come and exploit that. And I do get that. I do get that vulnerability is something that people will exploit. I'm not naive in that way, but it's not a weakness. And in 2024, certainly, as a leader, people want to work for somebody that is authentic, that is themselves, their authentic selves, that want to go out there and they can relate to them. And certainly generations that are coming in want to work for businesses that align to their values. And I realized that the people that I've got around me, friends, family, employees, past and present, and I've had a lot contact me over the last couple of months since announcing that I was going to release a podcast and going on my journey from being CEO MD for 15 years, that actually they work for me. They've worked for me. They value me. They see me as somebody that they can relate to, that they have permission to talk to me. And that's being vulnerable. It gives them a permission to be vulnerable with me. But I think there is that balance there. I still, you still need to not be vulnerable and let people exploit that. But I guess that comes with confidence and self-esteem, because I don't care what people say and think, in the main anyway.
It sounds like you've been able to take your armour off then.
Do you know what? Absolutely. It has. And I guess this takes me back to what I was saying about, you're 18 years old. Bell's palsy, for those that don't know, is ultimately, for me, I woke up with half of my face was paralyzed. Really scary. I thought that I'd just slept funny. In fact, I rang my mum, and my mum said to me, and she was at work at the time, and she said to me, just give your face a rub. And it's a bit like, when you lie on your arm, or it goes a bit numb. And I just thought, I just try and get the blood flowing, and which ironically is really similar. But I couldn't get this sensation back. So I spent 5 years trying to come to terms with this really traumatic experience, and the medical interventions, albeit nowhere near what they are now, and still education needs to be done, but absolutely non-existent really back then, and people reading textbooks and not quite sure what to do. And I put my armour on, and I put my mask on. I guess that's sort of armour in itself, really. And I desperately tried to make sure that my mask didn't slip. But 10 years in, 15 years in, a year in, whatever it might have been, when people said to me, what's wrong with your face? In fact, I've been out on a night out with friends, some really, really good friends who and I remember somebody saying to me, what's up with his face? And that would take me back 10, 15, 20 years, because that was my armour slipping, and feeling comfortable and enjoying it. Have a drink. And as you know, I haven't drank now for a couple of years, completely not related, just health-wise. And I'd go out, have a bit of a drink, go and have a bit of a party, enjoy a bit of a dance. And I felt like I let my mask slip because I felt safe. But I was safe maybe outside, but I wasn't safe inside, and it just set me back. So, I guess now I can walk around. I don't wear a mask anymore. I just am authentically myself. It sounds really cliche, but I am. I genuinely am.
That's really great to hear. And I'd now just like to ask you about your unique journey with leadership. I don't like the word journey, but I'm going to use it because it seems appropriate. And how you've managed that delicate balance between your leadership responsibilities and your personal mental health challenges. You have already touched on that a little bit, but can you share a little bit more about how that balance works for you?
Yeah, absolutely. So again, for those that don't know, so in 2009, I co-founded a people consultancy that has grown and grown and grown. We were like growing by 200% year on year, I think was one of the stats that we looked at some point. So some real hyper growth that we were experiencing, which was great. I use the phrase now of victim of our success, because it was great, but it was really hard work. And as a people consultancy, the expectation is on you really high to make sure that you're looking after the people that you've got around you. I've made so many mistakes over those years, first to admit that, not wear that disguise at all, because that does happen. And I did the real mistake of, I guess, a little bit like when people get into a relationship, they just start not talking to their friends, and they just stop kind of catching up with people, and they just get drawn into the relationship. And I got drew into the relationship of business, and I lost my identity. I became Gary, the person that was a leader. I wasn't Gary, a person that had a cat and some friends and I lived in this lovely house. I was Gary that was a leader. I was Gary, the only person that was ultimately there, and I lived and breathed it. And that was great. On good days, I was living the highs of it. I was super excited. It was brilliant. What I wasn't great at is the bad days, the highs and lows, the roller coaster of business growth. And when I stopped and when I had a bad day, I it was the worst days, and I had nothing to fall back onto.
So that sounds like you weren't actually looking after yourself amazingly well. That self-care that you mentioned earlier doesn't seem to have been apparent at that point. So what have you found that as a leader, as you've grown as a leader, what self-care strategies have you actually started to employ that you could share with other leaders so that they don't find themselves in the position that you were in when you're having those bad days and you're thinking, good grief, where do I go from here?
It's really interesting that you say, how did I become better at self-care? It's a really interesting phrase that you've used there, because Gary didn't exist. Gary Talkstaff exists, Gary as a leader exists, but Gary as a person, as a human being, didn't exist. So I wasn't able to practice self-care because it was irrelevant. And that, I guess that in itself was a real point there, is identifying that you are a human, that you are still a person, that you are still very much, you are two people. We wear, as leaders, we wear many hats. But for me, I had to remember that distinctly I was a leader and I was a person, I was a family member, I was a friend, or just an individual. So that was absolutely the first thing, and I would say to other leaders to do, is acknowledge that you are still you. Mm-hmm. Don't sacrifice that. We talk about work-life balance. I call it life-work balance. I get shouted at from a marketing point of view because no one Googles life-work balance. but like, let's put our life first. Let's put that first rather than saying work-life. It's life-work. So actually, as a leader, you need to remember that you've got a life. I am Gary as a life, and I am Gary as work. And for me, that is really, really important. I need to make sure that I do that. So before I even get into self-care, acknowledge that I am an individual. Does that make sense?
Totally.
And I think when I started doing that, I realized, and I sat down, and very, very few people know this. And I have to remember today what you know and what you don't know, because you see me on highs and you see me in floods of tears. You see me highs, super high on excitement and emotions and loving life. And I really struggled because I guess about 8 years ago it was, I realized that there wasn't a Gary. There wasn't a Gary life. There was just Gary work. Mm-hmm. And I was stood on stage. I was winning awards, and people were like, "Wow, look at how amazing this is." But what they didn't see is that I was really struggling. That I couldn't talk on camera like this because I was under so much pressure to even stand and look at people and stood on a stage. And I was at that point, I was talking to a CBT, cognitive behavioral therapist, and we were identifying what Gary really looked like. And a really cool little tool that she used was something called ACE. So she said to me, "Look, here's a piece of paper. I want you to draw a circle, and I want you to say, what are you achieving, being the A, what do you connect with, what gets you here, and what do you enjoy." So I just got a circle and I split it into 3 equal parts, and I then shaded a really tiny part of that said, "This is what I achieve." A really, really small part of that. This is what I enjoy. This is what I connect with. And then she said to me, imagine a little bit like a milking maid stool, or I don't know if they have them these days, and those 3-legged stools. She said, how thin would those legs be on your stool when you have a bad day, when you lean on it? And there was a couple of people around me that were doing the same exercise at the time, which was scary in itself, by the way. I must add, to sit in a group setting and be vulnerable and think. The first thing I did when I went to that was thinking, what if I know somebody that knows me? What if they go out there and say, "Oh, this guy that's running this big successful business that I've just seen win an award, he's depressed, he's struggling, he's struggling with all of these things." And that was hard in itself. But when I looked and realised I had these really thin, metaphorically, these really thin legs on this stool, I realised that no wonder on a bad day they would come crashing down and I would fall over, because they weren't stable enough. And I love that analogy, because I needed some big chunky legs on this stool that, if it was a bit wobbly, it was fine. But if I wobbled on these really thin legs, they would collapse. And I've entirely forgotten the question that you asked me, but
that's all right. We've gone down a track and it's wonderful. We've got some great ideas.
I'm sure we'll go down many more tangents as the series carries on. But yeah, it was.
But that analogy of a stool with very thin legs, I think that's something that many people can relate to, because sometimes it does feel like you're teetering, and if things aren't actually backing you up and supporting you, that's when things can actually go wrong.
I think, yeah, absolutely. I think one of the, it was that light bulb moment when I suddenly looked at it and thought, I've got to get some balance back. And I think that's what you're asking about was life-work balance, work-life balance, and how I can get that back. And I realised that nowhere in there was just a big void of things that Gary enjoys, because I was living and breathing business, and I still am, and part of this I am as well.
You still do, yes. I can agree with that. You still do.
Is that you telling me off? I don't know.
I wouldn't go as far as that.
I guess this is therapy, and I know it will be, and I know that interviewing people, I will learn a lot about myself, as well as certainly helping people tell their stories.
So can you give us an insight into what you would say to yourself now that you may well not have said to yourself even just last year?
So there's a really lovely book out there, and I don't read as much as I would like to, but it's A Magical World of Not Giving an F. I don't want to swear on this podcast. I'm sure I will at some point. And that's the world that I now live in. In fact, there's 2 different books by 2 different people. I think there was a Netflix series about one of them. I can't remember which.
Mark Manson.
Yeah. Oh, okay. Yeah, we had this conversation before recording, and I've realised that I read that book probably 8 years ago, actually, when in my darkest days, as it were, and I've started to live my life a hell of a lot more like that, actually, and take that pressure off me and just go, Gary, look, it's fine if that doesn't work out. If it doesn't work out how you want it to be, you're just doing draft 1. It's just a revision, and it's a journey. And we see failure. It's a really technical. It's a horrible word, failure. Like, you failed. Here's a certificate because you didn't win this race.
Oh, that
well
hit
done
me
for
there.
I did. It does. It's a really horrible word. But actually, the more that you get used to that, I'm preaching to converted to the positivity pathfinder.
Oh, but you're not just talking to me though. There's a whole load of people out there who are actually listening to what you're saying, and I'm sure what you've got to share is hugely important.
But yeah, and for that reason, I guess the lesson to be learnt is that the mindset changes. The mindset of being positive, I struggle with that word still. But certainly to go, I'm not scared of failure. I've got bills to pay like anybody else.
So within the leadership SME communities, there can be quite a stigma about talking about mental health and leadership, because some people put leaders on a pedestal and think, like, for example, you gave the example of you winning awards and people go, oh, that's amazing. Actually, we don't see anything. That's tip of the iceberg. We don't see actually what's going on underneath. So how can we get into a more open dialogue about this topic? And I know what you're doing with Leaders in Disguise is an attempt to break down those barriers. But what else could we be doing?
As a podcast, as a conversations that we're having, it's about normalizing conversations. When I started on this journey, I went out there and did research, and I looked at it. I looked at what was out there, who was talking about leadership, mental health, because we all hear in a very good way, we all hear about 1 in 4 people struggle with mental health. I do think that's a lot higher than that, but that's the stat that we hear. Now, great, that's become quite a norm to hear that out there. And when we talk about it a lot more openly than it was, there's still a stigma there. But who talks about leadership mental health? Who's really going out there and doing that? And I realised that whilst as a leader we get told that we need to look after our employees and our people and everyone around us, who is actually talking about the leaders? And I hear leadership development courses running, and I see people go out there and say, great, come on this program, and what we'll do is we'll look at marketing, we'll look at HR, we'll look at all of these finance, all of these different things. But I don't think I've seen one yet, and I don't think there is one out there. And absolutely write to me, send me a Gary Parsons UK a Twitter X message to tell me. I can't see any out there that talk about mental health of leaders, maybe around managers and mid-level managers, but certainly not SME business owners, big corporate people out there. And yeah, I went and did that work, and I found very few bits of research that talked about it. But one of them that I found was a stat that 72% of founders experience mental health challenges. And me being a millennial, I kind of look at that as a percentage and a fraction. And I look at that and say, okay, round it up, Gary. We talk about 1 in 4 people struggle with mental health. If I convert that 72%, round it up to 75%, that means that 3 in 4 people, 3 in 4 leaders experience mental health challenges. That's dangerous. 99.9% of businesses in the UK are SMEs, and 3 out of 4 of those leaders experience mental health challenges. 55% of those people experience high stress. They experience depression, they experience anxiety, all of these things that go in that, and nobody is openly talking about that. What is wrong? It makes me angry. It makes me really angry, having been in a fast-growing, hyper-growth business.
Interesting, because that just got me thinking about why can't we be humans in a leadership role? If you were human and actually showed all those emotions, and that was a natural thing that we did as leaders, would that not actually help the people that we work with, the staff? And actually those ripple effects would actually go out into society, and the whole of society would feel slightly more open about, actually today, when you say, well, it's the top of the conversation, we're talking about, oh, how are you today? Oh, I'm fine. Actually, people may well be just a little bit more open to say, tell you the truth, I didn't sleep very well last night, and I've got something preying on my mind. Have you got a moment? Can I talk to you about it? Is that something that, we're talking about culture shift. I know it's like turning round a tanker. It's going to take a very, very long time. What are your thoughts on that?
And nobody wants to walk into a room and say, oh, yeah, it's a horrible week, isn't it? Yeah, everything's going wrong, and I'm really annoyed. And be like, okay, mood hoover. Like, yeah, great. Suck all the energy out of this room. Oh, he's always miserable. And I think that's the difference. Oh, he's always miserable. Actually, that isn't what we're talking about here.
No, it's not.
We're just talking about being real and authentic. And we can experience good and bad days. And yeah, we don't want to be miserable. We want to be our lovely selves. But you're allowed. I'll give permission anybody who wants to talk to me about how they're struggling, because I want to make them smile. I want to turn them around. I think we need to do that more.
So that leads me on to talking about leaders who might be struggling with their mental health, and they might be hesitant to actually seek support or share their experiences. If that leader came to you today, what advice would you give them?
Do you know, it's really interesting that I guess when we say, like, what advice could I give to people? The first thing I'd do is not give advice. And then that sounds really cliche, but I saw somebody yesterday and they've had a really tough time, and I said, what's going on? Talk to me about it. So the first thing I would do is listen. And I'm not going to say that I have all the answers. I'm not a trained psychologist. I'm not clinical, I'm not qualified. And I think that can be a dangerous territory that we can fall into. Great that there's things out there, quite controversial, but there's things out there like mental health first aiders, and I think that's great for raising awareness. I think the first thing we need to do is listen, but also acknowledge that there are professionals out there. Go and talk to your GP. They are there. There are professionals that will listen to you. Don't be scared of that receptionist that we've started to condition ourselves with. Just go and talk to somebody. Yeah. The first time I did that, I can't quite remember that conversation that I had. I just said, I'm just a bit tired and things are going on. And she asked me, are you really okay? And I burst into tears. And she said, you're not doing all right, are you? Why are you worried about asking for help? And I said, I've got a lot going on now. I've got family, lots are going on in their lives. I don't want to be a burden. And I think that's a really interesting point to make there, is that you aren't a burden. You're not a burden on anyone. If I saw somebody in the road that was struggling and that I didn't know, I'd be more than happy to help them and point them in the right direction. So your best friend, your friends, your family, professionals, go and talk to them first. And one of the other things I will say quickly is to start just listening to yourself, listening to those signs and spotting those signs, because we don't always acknowledge that we need help. And the fact that you're saying, well, Gary, I'm coming to you, if I frame it how you said it, I'm coming to you because I need some help. Well done. You've spotted some of those signs. You've acknowledged them. You're probably already starting to do things about them, but don't overthink them, because I think the smallest changes that you can make are being more mindful, being more reflective, being more emotionally aware of what's going on around you, but not overthinking them.
That's really interesting you say not overthinking them, because I would say talk to yourself, because that voice in your head is very, very powerful. Talk to yourself as if you're talking to your best friend. Some of those things that you're telling yourself, you'd never say to your best friend. Come on, what are you doing? Sort yourself out. You wouldn't. You'd say, as you said, what's going on? Let me listen to you.
I think the problem with that is that I guess at that point that I found when I was there wasn't anything good to say. There was nothing good to say in my head. It was the things that I was going through in my head were come on, Gary, you've got to get on with it. What do you mean you need to go to sleep? You've got all of this work to do. Everyone else has to work till midnight. You've got to get on with doing that. Well, you're a hyper growth business. We've just won an award. You're successful. Come on, Gary, just get it done. It's not about you. It's about everybody else. You've got mortgages to pay. All of these things were going through my head. So when I tried to say, I need just a bit of time out, automatically I got told off. And even now I have those thoughts. I had to give it a stupid voice. Here's a really good tip. This little voice that's in my head, and sometimes there are people around me, I have to go, Gary, oh, Gary, you're stupid. Oh, you're successful. I have to give it a really stupid little voice, and sometimes it sounds like Zippy from Zippy
Rainbow.
From Rainbow. I was going to say Sesame Street. Zippy from Rainbow. We're like, oh, Gary,
showing
what's
our
going
age
on there?
now.
Oh, absolutely. But it has to be that stupid voice that's there, because, and I would say to anybody, if you hear those, if those thoughts are going through your head, give it a really stupid name and a stupid voice, and mock it, because it's not telling you what it wants to say. It's just being nasty. So just give that voice a really stupid voice. Give those thoughts. Say that again. Sorry. Give those thoughts a really stupid voice and a stupid name, and start saying nice things. Oh, and one of the things that Farah certainly taught me was, and I think I said it to her or vice versa, was the nice things that people say to you. I found this, and I think I might have said this to you when we went for a coffee not so long back. I was really shocked. I wasn't really shocked. I was quite surprised. I know I was shocked because I'd forgotten that these things are out there. I announced, this big announcement went out. Gary's stepping back from being CEO after 15 years. This is the week, by the way, before I stepped back and become non-executive director 1 day a week in the business in talk, staff and design for success. And I had emails from a competitor who actually I saw last week, and she gave me the biggest hug. In fact, she gave me about 3 of them in the space of an hour. Gave me the biggest hug. I had the first employee, I'm sure he won't mind me saying, Talk Staff Tim as we call him. Tim messaged me and said, I still use the things that you taught me way back when, 14 years ago, that I still use it in what I do now. And I was driving along one day and I had a smile on my face thinking like how lovely it was I was nearly broke into tears then. It's quite emotional thinking of these things. But, thinking of all the smiles of like what happened, how lovely those times were. I just got inundated and I'd forgotten that. And for anyone that's listening that thinks I need to tell somebody how good they are, that what they do is great, please go and tell them and write it to them if you can. And I say one of the things that Farah said to me before she passed away was go and print them out, put them on a post-it note. And I said, you could do that. You could write their name and the date next to it and put them on the fridge, put them around the room. And I realised this actually yesterday at some networking where somebody was talking. We put these signs up, don't we? I'm looking around the room at them now and I can only see one that says beach body ready, which I am absolutely not. But these signs where they say, you can do it. You can achieve anything. Failure isn't fatal. It's just the beginning. All of these things. I can't connect with those personally. I struggle with affirmation cards and things like that. Yeah. What I'm going to be doing over the next week is finding those emails, those messages on Facebook, on LinkedIn, and I'm going to print them off and put the date and the time and the person's name next to them, because they are real. They are what people have said to me. They are what people think about me. And those are the things that I smiled and emotionally connected with me the most. Scrap the last however long we've been talking, do that on its own, and I think that is the most powerful thing that I found.
Amazing. It's incredible when people tell you how well you're doing and how the impact that you've made on their lives, because we don't necessarily see the impact we make. So as we wrap up,
is it that time already?
I'm assuming.
Time flies when you're having fun, Sarah, and I've had lots of fun, and
good stuff.
I'm really grateful of the time and asking me difficult questions.
Oh, I hope they weren't that difficult, but I think some of the things that you have actually shared today will really resonate with people who are watching and listening. I
just think, for me, before you ask me those questions, for me, I think it's really important that throughout this journey for me to just point out that I'm not sat here like anybody else to just go, oh, it's fine. Yeah, sure. I'm doing a podcast and I want to try and tell this story of everyone else, what's going on in their lives. I've been there. I've done it. I've had therapy. I've had antidepressants. I've had highs and lows. I've cried. I've laughed. I've been there, and I've felt the pressure of what's going on. And despite that, and I say this with some grounding, is that I am successful. I have experienced success, and I look at what I've done very proudly. So
if somebody wants to be in the hot seat like you are today, how do they get in touch?
Everywhere. Gary Parsons UK, so Parsons, Gary with one R. So yeah, Gary Parsons UK, Instagram, TikTok, X, unless it changes the name by the time this goes out, everywhere. Or garyparsons.uk, the website domain. You'll see about the podcast on there. Just come and talk to me. I think one of the things I would say to people is, don't feel as though by talking to me you've got to come on a podcast. Let's just have a conversation. There are people that I've spoken to that aren't coming on. It's too early, but I'm sure when this goes out, I would hope that people would there. And I think, mine was Bell's palsy. It was that hard mental health journey that I've had throughout the business when I started it. But anyone that has, I certainly people that experience those neurodiversities of autism, of neurodivergence. I would love to be able to lift the mask on those people that want to tell those stories, what it's like to be a leader. I absolutely feel as though, especially in the climate that we're in, those people that are on a journey transitioning on their gender, their sex, and there's some incredible leaders out there that I know and can see that are navigating these things. That doesn't have to be hard. Like, let's go and talk about what it's like to be transitioning from male to female, or what, whatever they might be. I think everybody's got a story, and I think the more we normalize those, the better.
Wonderful. Thanks ever so much for speaking today.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate it.